Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for taking the time today to join us for our webinar where we're going to be talking about scattered spider, essentially what makes them a global risk in today's cyber threat landscape. For those that are not familiar with myself, my name is Brandon Tirado. I have the privilege and honor to serve as the director of GreyMatter Operations and Threat Research here at ReliaQuest. And today I'm joined by Colin Ferris. Colin, how are you doing?
Pretty good, Brandon, pretty good. I'm the manager of threat hunting and breach response over here at ReliaQuest. So everything from your nation states or proactive threat hunting to, in this case, scatter spider is what we're really getting in the weeds about.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the quick introduction, Colin. And without further ado, we can get right into it. We'll just go through a quick agenda just so that our audience can understand like what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to kick it off with meeting scattered spider. Who is scattered spider? I'm sure if you're tuning into this webinar that you have some knowledge of this adversary. From there, we're going to break down a campaign. There's been not a particular campaign, but in recent months we've engaged in IRs that are being orchestrated by this group. We're going to break down essentially what this looks like, taking the knowledge that we've learned to kind of share with the world the common attack lifecycle. We're going to, again, bubble it up after the fact because there'll be a lot of content that we're going to get through, essentially highlighting, again, the core tactics so that our audience is familiar. And then what's really, really important here is what do you do about it, right? What defense strategies will work in helping place the burden back onto this adversary in the event that they choose to intrude into your network. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with some detection and gray matter-esque on what it looks like and how we use our platform to essentially get to the outcomes that we do for our customers. So with that, scattered spider's rapid resurgence. This slide, I'd almost argue that this group has not been dormant for, some time. There was arrests in the latter half of 2024, but their tempo maybe fell off as what it was looking like previously. But this group has not gone into hiding. There has been an uptick, obviously, in some operational tempo, which I'm sure those that are listening have read about in the news. But before we get any further, wanted to kind of get through. Maybe Colin, can you help us understand just a bit more background on this actor and any other detail that you wish to provide?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's a good question, right? Is this really a resurgence? Scatter Spider, they're a English-speaking cyber criminal group, which is a bit different than what we normally see in the landscape. But they've been around since 2022. And a couple things that make them interesting, from an operational perspective, is that they really have weaponized their ability to social engineer to gain access. It's something they are phenomenally good at. They differ from a lot of these other groups, and it's partly due to their English-speaking nature. But they started in credential harvesting way back in the day, doing impersonation domains. You migrated to, calling help desk. And, we've seen that as a successful IA vector since, many getting access to these high privileged accounts, executives, admins, and then using that initial access to just, run wild afterwards. But another thing that's really interesting is they're a collective. A lot of these groups, you have these ransomware as a service groups, that they sell the model and then other people just get in. But Scatter Spider is it's a collective splinter cell of the COM, which is just a group of young individuals across UK, US and Canada that they are young adults, teens even, and they all sort of collaborate on these different projects. And so Scatter Spider is like a graduation from the COM almost, which also makes it really difficult to track from a law enforcement perspective because they're distributed. They're everywhere. They're picking up things as they want to do them. They're not as organized, but they are incredibly sophisticated. So, they target industries. We talk about this. Most ransomware groups, they just sort of operationally opportunistic. Whatever comes their way, they take it. But Scatter Spider has this continued habit of or intentionality between their target industries, where they'll pick a sector and they stick with it. 2, 3, 4 weeks. They'll do their research. They'll target these industries. They'll seem, we can talk about that a bit. They seem to be looking at the big players in those industries to make their moves on. But yeah, I don't know, Brandon, do you have anything else to add on that big player piece?
I was just going to add. So for our listeners that are not familiar with this concept of big game hunting, big game hunting is essentially a way of looking at targeting, specifically done or has been done by like ransomware groups in the past, where for the most part, and I'd say Scattered Spider in recent months has kind of shied away from what we see as a traditional opportunistic threat actor of a spray and pray type of tactic. They have definitely, if you're looking at the headlines, there's been some notable cases that have come out where Scattered Spider has been attributed to it. And these are not mom and pop shops, right? These are some really, really big trusted brands. And for a while, big game hunting kind of fell off, especially after the Colonial Pipeline incident, where that caused a lot of friction with law enforcement and how they became very engaged, and we kind of saw that fall off of their who they were actually impacting. But it seems as though, specifically with Scattered Spider, that there may be this, I think it might be safe to say, like, this emergence of that concept of big game hunting, which is, very targeted in nature for the most part, which is quite atypical of a cyber criminal, threat actor. But
yeah, I really think they started that, back in 2023, I believe, with the casino industry and hospitality, MGM, Caesars. They saw how valuable those kinds of massive organizations are to target. So they definitely seem to have taken that in stride as their next, target selection.
Yeah, and it's absolutely helped with their notoriety, right? They're a very well recognized group now in the headlines. Like, if I ask my mom, non-technical person at all, who's Scattered Spider, I'm sure she's come across it in the news and her daily reading. But yeah, I think that's kind of helped them build the profile and the podium that they kind of sit on when looking at it externally. But awesome. Well, with that, let's get into dissecting Scattered Spider's campaigns. So as I mentioned earlier, this group is not new to us. We've been engaged in multiple IRs throughout the years. However, what we've done, and as of recent, there's been multiple different incidents that ReliaQuest has become engaged in. And what we wanted to do here was kind of pick out, based on the typical attack lifecycle phases that this group moves through, what this looks like. And on the screen here is, a compilation of essentially multiple IRs over the past few months to kind of help articulate and showcase what it looks like and what we're seeing to be most common. So with that said, I'd love to pass it over to Colin now. Colin, do you mind just walking us through what this looks like from your side when your team gets engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is interesting. We talked about this attack life cycle and where Scattered Spider is now versus 2023. And I think there's some pieces that we can definitely take away as constants, right? I mentioned earlier, they used to impersonate domains, phishing tactics, credential harvesters. They've fallen that off, but 2023 is sort of where we started seeing this divergence into this explicit targeting of either C-suite or privileged accounts for social engineering help desk. So the way they do this is they do extensive research into their victims or their targets, I guess, through reconnaissance to determine, who are these individuals, what kind of access might they have, what's their personality like, how might I, as an English-speaking, cyber criminal, call into a help desk. And, an interesting piece there, we've seen more and more companies are often outsourcing help desk, and that makes them a bit removed too from their process and their control and oversight of that help desk policy. So there might even be a divide, either a language barrier or even understanding of who's calling in or what should be done. But they take this opportunity to abuse the human element of the kill chain to gain initial access. And that has been tremendously successful. The urgency around using a executive's account, like a CFO, a CISO, et cetera, to drive this. I have to have my MFA now. I need this now. The company's losing millions, contracts on the line, et cetera. If I'm a help desk person and I haven't been explicitly laid out, here's my playbook, here's how I should respond, I'd probably be scared too. Someone's yelling at me on the phone, right? It's intimidating. So
not to mention, right, like Fortune 1000, Fortune 500, organization, like thousands and thousands of employees. I don't know how often, say, the CFO is actively working and speaking with the help desk team to understand what they sound like, maybe, or like any type of rapport. And I think with targeting those specific types of senior leaders within an organization, the play on power is really what they're after here. Is, I don't have a relationship. These are a big organization. I'm the CFO. I'm the CIO. My request is urgent, ever more so than anybody else. Like, you need to do this now. So it is quite interesting to see like how they're targeting and looking at these accounts.
Yeah, I mean, they have truly weaponized human nature, and been very successful with it. And even using that leverage, right? That's just initial access. They don't typically stop social engineering there. What we see oftentimes is they use this first executive account to gain access, and then use that as additional leverage to social engineer help desk again to get access to more privileged accounts. They're like, hey, my team, that I'm working on this thing, they don't have access, I need them to get access right now, like, can you reset their stuff? Sure, let me be helpful. And next thing you know, you have super admin in your identity solution. It really can be that simple if those processes aren't in place. But they've really gotten very, very sophisticated and successful with those tactics, going from recon to initial access purely through like that human element of the kill chain, which is, as we all know, like the hardest component to keep secure.
Yeah. And I know in a recent case that we were looking at, there was where the portal that you would log into, there was a forget username prompt. And the prompt was essentially looking for the last 4 digits of a social security number, as well as the date of birth. Date of birth is probably not as difficult to uncover via whatever reconnaissance OSINT that a threat actor is using. But the last 4 of a social, that is very interesting on how this group was able to obtain that. And by doing so, what was returned was the actual username that was tied to the organization. So they were able to confirm, this is the account that I'm after. Now I have the means of taking maybe the credentials that I've harvested via phishing, or I've come across in whatever other means, to now employ those with that. So it is really eye-opening to see the proficiency that this group has with uncovering information on their targets.
It is funny. I don't know if you know, like this, what the social security card, looks like. It says not for identification purposes, and that's the only thing it's used for, is identification purposes. So it is really important to think through, these controls that you have in place for even just making it accessible for a user to figure out what they forgot, to think about, what you have and what you are. What can you combine to minimize the risk of these reconnaissance efforts being able to, uncover this information? I think social is one of those. Historically, we probably said, oh, it's semi-safe to use, but we've seen these massive breaches around socials in the last 3-4 years. I don't feel comfortable, I think, using it anymore. It's just so readily available. But yeah, I think Scatter Spider, moving on a bit down the kill chain here, one of the things that from operational tempo perspective that makes them unique is how fast they move. Some ransomware groups, their dwell time is between 3, 4, 5, even 2 weeks. We've seen that time drop over the last couple of years, but Scatter Spider, even in 2023, it's 24 hours. They can get to the access they need to do the damage they want to do. They are incredibly good at lateral movement and understanding what kind of information they need to discover to get to where they need to be. So one of the things that we see, interestingly, is they're very targeted. Whenever they get in, they go to SharePoint with these privileged accounts who have access to this kind of information, and immediately start looking for things like VPN, ESXi, identity, all these kinds of documents that might either have hard-coded credentials or provide steps on how to get access. That can then allow them to move laterally, set up persistence, privesc into what the exact role they kind of need. And we've seen it in multiple intrusions. It's back to 2023. Like I said, that's not a new thing. It is somewhat hard to differentiate between your day-to-day. They're using valid accounts. They're using the role designed to look at this kind of information. So it is a bit challenging, but there are some indicators you can look for. We're talking about taking back what you can do, understanding what baseline behavior looks like, and should you be accessing these sequence of documents or these different categories all within a short period of time? Probably not. No one can work that.
And I would just add there too, I know we're going to talk later on about some of the defense mechanisms that our listeners can employ, technical control, process, et cetera. But I know it's maybe not the most fun of an activity, but a good audit. When's the last time, these cloud storage or collaboration tools that are all connected, that someone took a hard look as to what is accessible and what exists and how accessible that information is? Does it need to live there? Because a group like Scattered Spider, we're seeing in such quick succession enumerating for the most common things. So a good call to action here is taking the time to audit, kind of doing that e-discovery piece of what exists and should it exist here, and are the privileges locked down, or these users allowed to see that? It's definitely a really good practice, because as soon as they get in, it's the first thing they do, because they're going to then take that, and that's going to help them with a successful lateral move somewhere else in the environment.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not to say too that, it's a cycle. Don't ever assume that this is a linear process. Like we've seen before, where they get to the discovery phase, figure out a piece of information they need, and then go back to help desk to get the account they want. Why not? They've been successful so far. Why not abuse that human element, the weakest element in the chain, rather than try to fight a technical control to get the access they need after they, pull AD group information, the user database, et cetera. So this whole aspect of get in, move fast, abuse human, discover, they've got it down to a T. I wish I had a Conti playbook like I do a Scatter Spiders playbook.
Sure.
It's super helpful.
Yeah, I think so. With discovery out of the way, right? They've got enough information to maybe make that first pivot. Obviously, again, as you talk through, it's a cyclical process, but that first pivot, let's maybe break down what we commonly see as what they're using to do that.
Yeah. So the first pivot, right? Talking about lateral movement, Scatter Spider is another group. Another differentiator yet again. They are incredibly sophisticated within cloud ecosystems. Traditionally organizations were on-prem. COVID helped migrate a lot of that into cloud, et cetera, with remote workers and just a general movement to cloud infrastructure. But Scatter Spider, since day one, has had an exceptional knowledge of cloud infrastructure, as well as SaaS applications and the interdependencies between those things. So lateral movement doesn't necessarily mean the traditional host to host kind of thing. But one of the things we often see them doing is pivoting using either VDIs. We've seen them spin up their own VMs. They'll move into a virtualized environment. They get access to it through their privileged escalation. They'll spin up a VM itself and then use that as their sort of, second stage beachhead, almost the stage operations. in the environment within that cloud environment. And then they'll start looking at, what kind of access do I have? What other instances are available to me? Moving into the cloud piece too, right? Do I have access to the backups? Do I have access to, if I have immutable backups, do I have access to the management console for those backups? Can I delete those backups? That whole lateral movement is just host to host, think application to application. That's really what you're starting to look at with this group in this cloud ecosystem that you need to be aware of. Yeah, the VDN piece or VPIs or VDI and VPN piece. I think one of the good takeaways here to think about when you're talking about what controls or architecture solutions can you put in place. Does your cloud environment, your applications, et cetera, your SaaS stuff is access limited purely to your IP space or your VPN space? Or can, as an adversary, I get access to your cloud environment just by social engineering, and then I can access all my applications? Do I have to go into a jump box, or I have to come in through your VPN, right? Those sort of things create hindrance. Like, that's the only thing we're always trying to do, is how much can I hinder the threat actor? Can I burden them in their operations? Which gives us, as responders, more time to contain the threat, uncover the threat, and contain the threat at that point in stage.
No, it's a great shout, right? It's all about pain on the adversary. The much that you can inflict on them, the more benefit as a responder that you're going to have. I always like a formula that I always like to bring up is technical control plus visibility is what's going to be able to provide you to put pain. And I think it's a really great segue into that persistence mechanism, because specifically with Scattered Spider, as alluded to earlier, with their knowledge and familiarity with working with inside like a cloud environment, or even with what we'll talk about here with ESXi specifically, they're very much leveraging that knowledge that they obtain to help further their operation from a persistence standpoint. So, Colin, I'd love for you to share kind of what that looks like in that stage of the kill chain.
It's almost easier to say what it doesn't look like. ESXi, I think, if you don't know, ESXi, right, it's a solution for hosting virtualized infrastructure. It is very, very challenging to secure for that exact reason, right? There are limitations to what you can see from an ESXi perspective at the management layer compared to what you're actually virtualizing. So one of the things we see, this isn't new to Scattered Spider, this isn't new to threat actors in general. The ESXi, I think, has been a target for at least this last several years from a ransomware perspective, because if you can take down a virtualized infrastructure, you hit an ESXi, you can take down everything underneath it. There's a lot of damage to be done, almost like a single point of failure, which is why those credentials are typically very, very well protected. But it is interesting what their sophistication, right? Like, how do you go about an ntds.dit dump, right, when you have virtualized infrastructure that you can't get access to? One of the really cool things we see from this persistence mechanism, and even like exfiltration, right, is I going a bit into the credential access here too, but right, I can take that host, I can spin it down, and I can just mount that virtual drive on my own VM that I've spun up and dump everything out. You can't see it. It's just the host spinning down, host spinning back up, the drive's mounted somewhere else. The logging is very, very minimal. So the ESXi component is really critical to understand what access do I have available to it. Am I logging the minimal amount of logging available to me in the ESXi management console to just have visibility into it if I need to be aware of what's going on? But really, like, alerting on your ESXi credentials, who's got access, when there's getting access, like the role-based checkout kind of thing. What am I getting access for kind of pieces. Obviously, we talk about ngrok too here, right? Tunneling. You can just any type of method like ngrok, where you effectively just create that outbound that you have no visibility into. There's obviously some detection methods, but when you're looking at virtualized infrastructure as well, you're sometimes limited in where you can put an agent. So that data can just go out. Let's say with DLP, something sitting in line that can scan that traffic. It's honestly really, really challenging at times to even be able to understand what's going on. We talk about technical control plus visibility. There is a limitation to a lot of that aspect there.
Yeah, and I think it's a a perfect setup too for that credentialed access piece, because as you had talked about earlier with the cyclical process, we've seen in multiple cases where it's almost turned into a cat and mouse game where they were able to get access to, say, in this case, ESXi, the hypervisor level, and then decommission or turn off a domain controller that's in production to then dump the ntds.dit file so that then they can take those hashes offline and look to crack them. Mm-hmm. Where as a result of that, and we've seen in many cases, them actually starting to pick up on the fact that their cover is now blown, and they kind of get away from this, not that they're being stealthy, but they're a bit less concerned with the amount of noise that they make. And as a result of that, we find the one account that they were leveraging, and then action to, disable, remediate that account happens. But because I just got access to 1,000 records of hashes and I have been able to crack them, that's where password complexity really starts to play a big part in this. Now, you got rid of this account. Guess what? I got 1,000 others that I'm going to start to leverage, and it's a cat and mouse game. So another really good call to action here is, when is the last time you were able to do a domain-wide password reset, right? Like, how quickly can you do that? Because specifically with the dumping of ntds.dit or getting access to a credential, store like CyberArk or Delinea, whatever cyber or solution that you use, if those are configured to rotate passwords with Active Directory or Entra in this case, the ability to mass reset, because you should look at all accounts that have authenticated against that domain controller as essentially compromised. Yep. And that's kind of how you get out of playing that cat and mouse game.
Yeah. And I think also hitting back on the, password, management solutions, your PAMs, that's always been a target for ScatterSpider. Obviously, we're going to, eventually they're going to pull the NTDS, they're going to go on the Active Directory. But they still gotta, like I said, they like to live in cloud. So applications, those service accounts, engineering accounts, management accounts, all those things typically live in PAM solutions. And that's also where they're going to be pivoting back into your backup systems and to your management, your hypervisors, like that. There's those two identity components that you really need to be thinking about, both how do I protect, and in a worst case scenario, how do I remediate and contain this kind of thing? So do you have a break glass account? When's the last time you checked that it worked kind of situation?
Absolutely. There's a lot of, the theme here is there's a lot of proactive things that, teams can do. And again, there is no silver bullet in any of this, right? But again, it's all about putting pain onto the adversary. So I appreciate that walkthrough, Colin, and I'm sure our audiences as well. Now, I know that was a lot. So really quick, just to kind of help summarize essentially the core tactics that this group employs. I'll pass it to you to kind of help bring that all together.
Yeah, obviously, there was a lot there, and we could spend hours realistically talking about all the nuances. But at a very high level, the things you should be aware of is the advanced engineering, social engineering aspect. It's what really differentiates their operations from most other groups out there. That exploitation of the human element to then gain that access and take advantage of MFA controls either not being there or being weak and allowing easy reset by an end user and access to these privileged accounts right off the bat. I don't need to worry about privilege escalation if I can start with a privileged account. You cut your entire dwell time significantly down with that kind of access. So, and then lastly, this persistence. We talked about it earlier. The VM space is really, really difficult to manage just because of how nebulous it is and where it sits in an application flow. But persistence via unmanaged VMs and hypervisor logging are big blind spots to be aware of. There are opportunities there. You can manage things like checking for unmanaged VMs in your environment, having logging available to see, oh, something was spun up. Do I have a Jira ticket, or do I have some case management system tied back to this asset being spun up? It's outside my hyperscaler pod. Like, why is it there? So there are opportunities there that you can start putting into your detection workflows, but it is a big blind spot to be aware of.
Absolutely. And I kind of, we've sprinkled it throughout, right? Some guidance on what our audience can do to kind of help thwart actors like Scattered Spider. So why don't we kind of bring more attention to that, articulate, what are the most actionable things that our listeners should take away, and then obviously, ReliaQuest and our approach on how we look to combat the threat that is Scattered Spider.
Yeah. So, I mean, to start, right, we talked about the human element. That it's a policy, it's a process, and you can put technical controls in place for this, but strengthening what your identity verification process looks like, particularly for high value accounts. That's your executives, your admins, like anything that has access or could be abused, like with this power element, right? Anything that has that sort of component of risk, high value targets need to have associated processes in place to help mitigate them being targeted. An end user, and whatever group down on the floor might not necessarily need the same control in place, because by least privilege, they shouldn't have the access. So it doesn't need to have a business impact, but it is definitely worth considering putting these things in place. You talk about what you are, what you have, and what combination works for your organization that you can really harden that aspect. But obviously, this next piece is hardened virtualized infrastructure. So there are things you can do, obviously, from a authentication perspective and managing your access to this infrastructure at the management level. We also talked about, we didn't talk about, but to mention also patching. There is, they can exploit if you have out of date ESXIs. There are exploits available that allow sort of bypassing the authentication mechanisms available to you, right to the admin level. So understanding what risk state your infrastructure is in, and then knowing where your blind spots are is a great spot. Most people don't even think about just knowing where my blind spot is. Once you know where it is, you can build controls around it. And then, like I said, in this case, you can look for unregistered or unmanaged VM spinning up. It's a really easy thing to do, but it does provide a little bit of visibility into an otherwise pretty hard to manage space.
Yeah, I'd also add there too, on like the ESXi example. With ESXi, you have vCenter, and then you have vSphere. And vCenter is essentially like the management console for all the hypervisors. It's the management console for all the hyperscalers that you have, all the other hypervisors that are running in your environment. Whereas vSphere is essentially like that individual hypervisor that may or may not report into vSphere, a interface that someone would be able to spin up a VM from that hypervisor. If there's no linkage between the two, it's very challenging to kind of see and track those unmanaged assets. So, best practice, if you're using multiple ESXi deployments within your environment, cutting off that access to the likes of vSphere so that no one can spin up virtual machines from there. They actually have to go to vCenter, whereas where you get your real visibility and you can help look and find ways to identify what Colin is talking about right now with when things get spun up, not tracked with a Jira ticket or any other type of IT solution. So it is a good, specifically in the ESXi example.
Yeah, no, it's a really good call out too. Yeah, it is. We've been thinking about this space for a long time. It's going to continue to get abused. So anything you can do to tighten the relationships and the visibility there, highly recommend you put in place. And lastly, conduct social engineering assessments, and employee training too. And I think one of the things, and this has always been something I try to drive home with our customer base, is once a year security awareness training is really security theater. It's got to be done continuously. There's studies out there about how much people retain their knowledge after they're exposed to something. And if you don't continuously have these data points that keep coming up over and over and over, you'll just forget it. It's just natural. We have so much things going on along in our life. So it's really important that even if you have to pick a specific thing, like you set up a cadence, whether it's quarterly, whether it's biannually, like something that's more frequent than just once a year, to give people the repetitions they need to at least have it in their brains, rather than just checkbox, I'm done with it.
Yeah, and then something I'd add to that too, and it's kind of in relation to the help desk part, right? Like, no one listening has to go out and procure a services contract with whomever to go about doing a campaign after you've set up some type of protocol with your help desk, right? The adversary, we know, is utilizing not only the extensive reconnaissance, but with the evolution that talk-to-speech models have provided and being able to voice clone, this is something that is totally in control of the security teams of being able to test that. Obviously, you don't have to go out and procure a contract with somebody. You can do it yourselves for free, essentially. I would totally recommend that this become a best practice, if you would, to do at least a quarterly assessment on, are the policies that we have in place with our help desk, are they working as expected? If not, how do we get better for the next time we test this?
Yep. And the big piece there is get better. Blame doesn't get us anywhere. So like take whatever failure is, determined, and grow from it, rather than blame the end user, because like they just want to get better too. So they want to keep their job. Everyone wants to keep a job. So at the end of the day. But yeah, obviously, there's aspects of ReliaQuest too that are specific to us, that we can help provide. So I don't know if Brandon, you wanted to talk a bit on the DRP side.
Yeah, I mean, we have with our DRP offering and ReliaQuest, we have extensive use cases that are great out of the box with coverage for tons of different types of threat, but specifically with Scattered Spider, we have seen with domain registration. We have our impersonating domain use case. We have typo squatting, leak credentials. So a lot of the reconnaissance that is being done initially to obtain a valid credential, this is a great solution to kind of help understand what is being registered. We've been able to, I'm sure we'll be able to link it here too, is a research as of recent of like where we took from 2022 to 2025 of Q1, essentially what were the commonalities in the clusters of domains that were registered, and we can see quickly that there is a trend there, and impersonating the likes of major IT providers that they can throw in their domain with a hyphen or something to then add your domain to it to kind of help further masquerade as a legitimate site that users should be interacting with. There is a plethora of different options that our DRP solution provides, and it's definitely a unique thing for ReliaQuest.
Yeah, understanding your external risk, I think, is something that if you get to the maturity perspective that you can, have the time to do so, it's definitely the next step to do. There's a lot of outlying assets or, patch management that's not being done, or in this case, we talked about being able to find an account ID purely based off of, information that could be readily available. Not understanding what that is and getting it logged as a risk is really important to move forward in your security module or maturity models. Excuse me. Obviously, detection rules. So we've had several engagements, since 2023 with Scatter Spider, and have had success in understanding sort of what opportunities there are that are unique to this group, and how they operate. So one of the ones, in a relatively recently, but we've seen in the past with MFA enrollment emails being deleted, but not by the user, by another user. We talked about this privilege escalation aspect and social engineering accounts that are related to them, or assume effectively, if you're AWS, assume role kind of situation. If I have access to an Exchange admin or someone who has authority on behalf of another user to manage their inbox, I can go in and delete the MFA email registration. It is an interesting one because it differs a lot from BEC. It rules a lot of that out, because I know that is an indicator in BEC, but we've seen it in Scatter Spider in the specific where it's deleted by another user, which is pretty unique to this group. Another great success one we're exploring with, experimenting with, is high risk and anomalous logon signals. Obviously, these can be a bit noisy, but we've seen a lot of value in tracking these events. If you have that identity protection kind of solution in place to map back to within like 40 minutes password resets. So what this looks for, right, is the social engineering aspect, which is really, really hard to keep track of, because unless you're monitoring help desk calls, you're not going to get that. But after that, so social engineering, that initial access where they're logging in from something that's not normal. We've seen them use mobile ISPs. We've seen them use, run-of-the-mill Express VPNs. So using that next signal and preceded by this password reset is a really good indicator to start looking into this. Hey, is this something more that I got to look into? And a big opportunity to set up automation to just say, if I have enough confidence in the signal, I can just outright reset this account and investigate it in my own time rather than having to, wait for anything more to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of talked a bit about it, but with our approach and how we've leaned so hard into agentic AI and what that's done for our ability to be able to not only get to a narrative as to like what is happening, but also essentially what we can do from a containment perspective.
Oh, no, got muted
Sorry,
there.
I muted. I apologize. But what we can do from a containment perspective, speed, this group in particular, very fast adversary. So speed, timing is of the essence. With our agentic approach to AI, it's been able to help, again, bring back or place that burden back onto the adversary, because we're able to glean on those insights and actually do something with it almost in real time. So awesome. Well, that sets us up before we get into the Q&A section, I did want to take a quick moment for our listeners that maybe are not as familiar with ReliaQuest and what it is that we do. So essentially, ReliaQuest, I want to explain our GreyMatter platform. It's played a critical role in every outcome that we get and do for our customers, but it's also, as we talked about just previously, what it's done for leaning into our approach with AI, how we've been able to speed up getting to outcomes for our customers. And so GreyMatter is an AI security platform, operations platform. It's built by practitioners for practitioners. It's designed to solve real world challenges that our security teams that we partner with are facing every single day. Combining that with advanced types of technologies like cyber asset management or digital risk protection, as we talked to earlier, it's been able to provide a true unified view of the attack surface. And the platform goes well beyond just simple integrations. It's creating a seamless connection with the existing solutions that our customers have procured. We like to think that our customers and the technologies that they bring in makes them the platform. And all of this, being able to stick all that together has enabled teams to act more quickly and then obviously make smarter decisions without having to navigate the complexity, right, with having to manage different things, different consoles, et cetera. And, through our automated approach with agentic AI, GreyMatter is empowering our security teams that we partner with to stay ahead of the threats and focus on what matters most and deliver those results with confidence. And because of how GreyMatter is built and the way it complements the expertise of our team, as well as our customers' team, it's been instrumental in helping us uncover and detect, contain, investigate, and ultimately respond to adversaries like Scattered Spider. All in all, it's not just a tool. It's a platform designed to elevate any capabilities of our security teams that we partner with, driving towards those meaningful outcomes. So if you want to learn more about ReliaQuest and our GreyMatter platform, we'll link some stuff down for you guys to take a look. But with that out of the way, let's jump into Q&A. There's been a couple of questions that have come in the chat. we'll see what we can get to real quick. If I'll pop open the chat. Colin, what specific logging or monitoring tools would you recommend to detect activity at the hypervisor level? That's a really good question.
It is a really good question. We talked a lot earlier about the VM space as a challenging place to look at. So I think, like I mentioned earlier, there is opportunity at the management level to be logging in your actual console. There are some logs that you can be forwarding in. I think another big component is setting up heightened awareness or elevated monitoring for the accounts that have access to this console, right? Why you don't necessarily want to be alerting on the activity after it happens when you could be alerting on the access that is outside the norm prior to getting to this console. There's those aspects. There's also like the ability we talked about the VM space, right? Spinning up and spinning up down, unmanaged devices. That is its own separate log in the console itself that you can be looking for, as well as something you can be looking for outside of that, like in your cost centers, in AWS, et cetera. Like there's opportunity there to build other telemetry points outside of relying on that single stack for that kind of logging.
Yeah, I'd also add there too something that Scattered Spider, as we mentioned, young adults, sometimes even teenagers, male, kind of get where I'm going at it. They can be a bit
Vulgar.
spicy. Yeah, vulgar, spicy, whatever you want to call it, whatever verb you're looking for there. But we've seen in a lot of cases where when they're spinning up virtual machines that they use profanity in the names of the VMs. So if you have like a standard or what should be a standard naming convention for the assets that are being spun up, any deviation from that could also be a really good signal.
That's a really good shout.
Yeah. I think we've been talking for a while. Let's take one more question. How can we test the resilience of our help desk workflows without disrupting day-to-day operations? And I think I'll take this because I think I kind of spoke to it earlier. The resilience aspect, like there's nothing stopping anybody that's listening in their security program from being able to, you don't even have to get super technical with it and use talk-to-speech models and clone voices and do all this extensive reconnaissance, right? You can very much like look at what the policy is today and then put someone in a position to start testing it. I'm going to call into the help desk and I'm going to impersonate so-and-so who has this title within the organization. I am maybe not a seasoned social engineer, but I can at least attempt and make strides to test whether or not I'm able to get whatever objective I'm after, whether that is a password reset, that's an MFA reset, et cetera, without, again, interrupting or disrupting day-to-day operations with the help desk. Sure, you can make the argument that I'm taking time away from answering like genuine requests that are coming in via end users, but at the cost of that versus what this could come out to be, I'd argue that this is totally worth the time and investment. So,
yeah, 100% agree. At the end of the day, the cost of that tiny amount of disruption versus the long-term impact of a breach is well worth it.
Yep. So, well, that's all we're going to do for questions. We've been talking, like I said, want to thank everyone for tuning in again, wherever you're tuning in, morning, afternoon, evening, very much appreciated. I hope this was very informative. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a question that you put in the chat and we didn't get to it in our Q&A section, we'll be able to get back to you. We have your what you registered, your email address, et cetera. So we'll make sure to reach back out. But again, thank you so much for joining us today, Colin. Thank you so much for joining us and being able to share all the knowledge that you have on this group. It's been a great one. So thanks again, guys. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk soon.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Bye, guys.